So now we're to the Indie Insider Information portion of the show with the theme, you find out what something is worth after you've paid for it. Now, I found Bryan Farrish Radio Promotions while surfing the net this past spring. And after reading and reading all the information on their site until my eyeballs were falling out of my head, I wrote a quick letter of inquiry to them. I said, to whom this concerns. After reading the mountain of articles on your website, my God, my head is spinning. I would very much like to know more about your Airplay campaigns and the costs involved. And also, thank you so much for the wonderful information you provide. It's like the encyclopedia of radio. It's no wonder we indie artists fall over each other trying to get a major label deal, when all you want to do is make music. And that takes years of practice to begin with. Who has the time to think and learn and try radio promotion? Give me an expert any day. And guess what? Here he is, Petro from Bryan Farrish Radio Promotions, as found on the net at radio-media.com. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to kick right in with a question that I think a lot of people have, that I talk to who listen to the radio quite regularly, and that is, why do we always hear the same old stuff on the radio every day and over not just one but many, many stations?
Well, radio is a highly formatted venue, as a lot of people know. So when you have songs that are being selected, they're not just being selected merely by, say, quality in terms of what someone actually likes that's maybe programming the station. A lot of artists that we work with, or sometimes even the managers that we work with, tend to maybe take it personally if a certain station isn't ready to play their record yet.
Right.
And it's easy to forget that it's not just the material involved, it's also what's going on with that record or that artist or that label if they're signed.
I see. So they're going after the superstars.
Well, not necessarily the superstars. That's a good point. Sometimes you got a format that leans more towards the indie artist, or it leans more towards artists that maybe aren't household names yet, but it's still formatted.
I see. Now, in your experience, because you're working obviously with radio promotions, and we know that radio promotion is one of the most complicated parts of the promotion for the artist, and one of the most expensive that a major record label would dole out. What is the ratio then of spins to, do you have a ratio of spins to, and how much it yields in CD sales and MP3 downloads?
That's a really good question. There's never an easy direct correlation between spins and sales, because sales are contingent on so many different factors for different kinds of bands. Usually with the artists we work with, sales are largely a function of live performances. They're obviously a function of how well the listenership connects with the band. I mean, if someone's listening and they want to own that record, then that's what's going to drive the sale. There are many ways to get to that listener initially, and radio is one of the essential ways, you know.
So following up that radio play with, like you say, live performance or other ways that they might have video, for example.
Videos help. The other thing is, and you know, again, in the U.S., record distribution is another pretty hairy topic, meaning that it's complicated, it's much more complex than most people think about, and it's tough. Radio helps in many ways, and one of the ways that it helps is to establish an artist, and again, establish a marketplace for an artist. When you have a marketplace for anything, whether it's a product, it's a record, anything like that, if you have a marketplace that you can establish with radio, then you can make a great argument for working with any number of different other people. If you're looking for management, if you're looking to try and get the record in a store, you have to convince that store there's a marketplace for your record. So radio is a way of presenting pretty viable proof to somebody that says, you know what, there are people out there that will buy my record, we just need to do X. And so it's a great way to attract attention not only from listeners, but from the industry, from other people you'd like to work with.
Do you have a really good example of an indie artist who perhaps had no budget and managed an Airplay hit?
An Airplay hit never happens without a budget.
Ah, demystify me, Peter.
Demystify. it's virtually impossible to try and get a significant number of radio stations to support you without having a budget to get the word out, because otherwise you'll have no way of reaching those stations, you'll have no way of building that buzz.
Which brings me to my next question. On the internet, we're seeing more and more and more services available that say, submit your song to us for $20 and we'll give it to 10,000 radio stations. There's a lot of this going on online. Have you seen any of these?
Yes.
And what do you think of it?
My recommendation for someone who's looking at those is no option is a bad one. It's great to have a lot of things at your fingertips that you can consider. So let's assume for a moment that you're looking at a service that actually will service whatever. It's an MP3, it's a CD. Let's assume they actually are going to service it effectively to however many stations. Servicing a record very rarely gets much done because a radio station is getting so much material, 200 or 300 CDs a day submitted to them. That doesn't mean everyone arrives on the desk of a decision maker. So even getting the CD to a desk requires some promotion and making sure that it actually doesn't get tossed and it gets the light of day and gets really reviewed and considered. You've got to have someone or a group of people who are really making sure that that process occurs. Let's imagine, you have dozens of stations that are playing your record, and then all of a sudden you realize that there are hundreds of stations playing your record. And now you realize that even within a given format, there could be even thousands of stations across the world that are playing you.
Uh-huh.
Question is, how do you know? How do you know that they're playing it?
This is a good question.
So even if there's support, even if on the off chance that you send the CD and someone actually test spins it a couple times and people start talking about it, if you don't know what they're doing and you can't prime the pump and hype it up and thank them and all the other things that involve
and tour in that area.
Right, then you're really getting you're getting only a fraction of the effect that you would get if you knew what was going on.
So that's something that you guys over at Bryan Farrish do? You actually monitor?
Absolutely.
What if you have what you think is a crossover hit? Do you ever encounter music like that being presented to you? Something like a Shania Twain, who crossed over into like a top 40 market, but really originated from country. Is that something that people at Bryan Farrish dream of?
A crossover hit is a wonderful thing in the sense that it can increase your marketplace dramatically. It becomes a pop record now that you can push to pop.
But pop is a very difficult market, isn't it?
Sure.
If you're an indie coming in.
To be completely honest, it's a mixed blessing because unless you're a major label and you're used to pushing a pop record, and I say push, we promote a pop record. When you're promoting a pop record, it's inordinately expensive.
Uh-huh. So let's say I wanted to market my Nothing But Trouble album, which is essentially a pop album, and I wanted to really start spinning very similar to the big stars. I have big dreams, right? How much money do I have to go find or steal? A ski mask doesn't cost much, right?
You've set yourself up for a tough assignment in order to try and get the kinds of spins that those big artists did. Those artists didn't do it overnight, and you're probably not going to be able to either.
Right.
And, of course, they had an enormous budget and still didn't do it overnight. It was always a building process. So the best way to look at it is to look at what style of music you have and identify within the budget you can work with what are the best ways to get some activity or the most activity you can. We have information on our website that talks about what you can do if you have zero budget. There are ways to try and get, some activity with radio. And if you have, different levels of budget, we actually have breakdowns for what the different indie labels and things like that, what kind of budget they're operating with when they try and do something. So you can see what a realistic budget is for getting country radio to really start spinning the record versus different other types of formats.
Are there radio stations that are privately owned or more independent artist friendly as opposed to, say, big ones in Chicago or New York that are perhaps owned by Clear Channel and Infinity and are just difficult for a little guy like me to contact?
Absolutely. That makes such a great point. One of the things that you definitely want to always remember as an artist in approaching radio is there's an entire spectrum of stations that are generally a little more accessible if you're working on a smaller scale or if you're an indie artist.
All right. Peter, this is, on the one hand, been very comforting to hear you explain some of these complicated issues. On the other hand, it's daunting for the artist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give all of our listeners your website one more time. It's radio-media.com, and you can send them an email, and they do respond.
And if anyone has a specific question, it would be wonderful to hear from some of your listeners. My email is peter@and then radio-media.com.
Right, so that's
so
Peter
if anyone has a specific... Right, peter@radio-media.com.
All right, fantastic. And also, if they didn't catch that the first time or they have trouble spelling that fast, then they could always email famegames@meremusic.com as well.
That sounds wonderful, Laura. And again, I love what you're doing for indie musicians. I think it's a great website. And anything I can do to help, please let me know.
All right, fantastic. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a great week, Laura. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.